Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of the REBT Advocates with Dr. Michael R. Edelstein of 3minutetherapy.com. You can find his book, 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life at therebt.life. Great dude, San Francisco-based clinical psychologist. And he does Skype, he does telephone, he does in person. Man, he is just a psychological wonder. What can I say, folks? And me, Tommy Bateman. I'm a counselor. I mean, it's a thing. Anyway, today we wanted to talk about secondary disturbance. Now, we may have talked about this concept before, and if you've been paying attention to us for the past 80-some episodes, you would have come across this concept before, but we wanted to focus particularly on this and this alone. So, Michael, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It may be downhill for me for the rest of the episode, but I'll try. And secondary disturbance normally means getting upset about being upset. And by upset, we mean an emotional disturbance, not an emotion or even a negative emotion. And so there are 3 steps in secondary disturbance. The first is you have a practical problem, real or imagined, because you can imagine a problem coming up or that you had in the past, so it may not necessarily be a real one. And you have a goal to, let's say you're thinking about a job interview, so your goal is to do well at the job interview, not do poorly. So that's your practical problem. How can I arrange that? Then you get yourself disturbed about doing poorly by telling yourself irrational beliefs such as, I must do well at the job interview. It would be awful if I blow it. This would mean I'm a loser. And that causes worry, anxiety, not concern, but over concern, and sometimes depression. So that is the first emotional problem. So that's the primary, what we call the primary problem. It really means it's a primary emotional problem. It means it comes first chronologically, and then comes the secondary disturbance because it comes second chronologically when you realize you're worrying about the job interview, or you realize you might worry at the job interview, and you start worrying about that. I must not worry at the interview, or I must not worry now, 3 months before the job interview. So when you tell yourself, I must not worry, or I must not be depressed, or I must not get angry, or I must not addict myself, then you have a psychological problem about a psychological problem, which is about a practical problem. So secondary disturbance refers to the second demand, the second emotional problem, not the second problem. So try not to confuse yourself by counting in the first practical problem in this line of numbering the problems.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said something like you wanted to focus on that. This secondary just meant chronologically. It didn't mean in importance or predominance. In fact, oftentimes in my practice, and I know Michael and yours, and I think you said this even in your book, that sometimes when we work on the secondary disturbance and it's solved, for lack of a better way of putting it, the primary problem goes away, or at least is more easily handled by the client. In fact, sometimes the secondary disturbance is really the predominant or the more worrisome or more concerning problem. Has that been your experience?
Oh yes, exactly right. The secondary problem often magnifies the primary problem, and makes it much worse. So as you're saying, Tommy, it's usually useful to start by attacking the secondary problem. And also, if you attack the secondary problem, sometimes that's really the main issue. So that will help you with the primary problem, or as you're saying, Tommy, it will disappear entirely. So that's a very good point. And another reason why it's important to attack the secondary problem, not all the time, but most of the time, is that when you have the secondary problem, it tends to cloud the practical issue, it makes it much harder to deal with the practical issue. So, for example, when I work with couples and one couple is angry at his or her partner, and then they feel guilty about being angry, and their practical problem is their assertiveness skills are poor. If they try to directly work on their assertiveness skills while they're still angry, while they still have emotional problems, then it's going to be harder to work on that. So try to deal with emotional problems first.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just put this in an ABC in a 3-minute exercise. When it comes to secondary disturbance, the activating event is, it isn't a practical problem. It isn't, I failed at doing X. I failed at hitting the target or whatever it is. I failed at some sort of thing, or they didn't like me, whatever. It's not that at this time. With secondary disturbance, the activating event is I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I'm depressed, or I'm guilty, whatever it is, a different emotion. So usually the A in a secondary disturbance is an emotion itself, an irrational emotion, or just any really emotion. And then B, I'm the belief, the irrational belief under that is I must not feel that thing, or look at me, I failed again. What a schlub I am. Universalizing that judgment upon yourself, and of course the consequence is the anger, the deeper sadness, you name it. So yeah, in this case, the A is not a practical thing. It's the emotion.
That's right, exactly right. And also, there are some solutions to this. And so the question is what to do about being upset, or worrying about worrying. And the first step is to identify it's a secondary. So there are a couple of red flags telling you it could very well be a secondary. And that is, if you're working on the primary emotional disturbance and you're not getting anywhere, sometimes you're even thinking, working on the primary emotional disturbance must cure me, and I'm not getting cured. There's something wrong. And the thing that's wrong might be there's a secondary there that you're not addressing. Another red flag saying it could very well be a secondary emotional disturbance is that it's hard to figure out why you're anxious in the first place. So, for example, you wake up in the morning and you're anxious and you don't know why. So often it's, I must not get anxious today, or I will get anxious today. Isn't that awful?
Mm-hmm.
Or I will get anxious today because I was anxious for the last 99 years. That's horrible. I'm an emotional basket case. So those are some keys that it might be an secondary disturbance.
And I think that's really important that you said that, because a lot of folks come to see me and actually have emailed us at rebtadvocates@gmail.com. Send us your hate, your love, your questions, your comments. We want to hear it all. But in that email, we got someone saying, hey, what if I'm feeling anxious, sad, angry, but I can't even tell why? I don't even know what the A is. And you just said if you can't really identify it, you wake up and you're anxious. Perhaps it's a big old clue that is a secondary disturbance. So that's another tool in everybody's toolbox right there. So thank you, Michael.
Right. You're welcome. And so the key is to question, challenge, contradict the must or the awful or the self-blame. I'm no good. It's awful. And I must not feel anxious. I must be cool, calm, and collected all the time. So question that and remind yourself that you're human, which means imperfect, which often means anxious. We were evolved, born, and raised to be anxious. So of course, you will be. You're not special. You're not exempt from the human condition. So go be anxious, go be human, and move on with your life with it.
Yep.
Also, a paradoxical strategy you can use is try to feel anxious, get in touch with your anxiety, feel it, allow it, accept it, even embrace it, and see if it's at all as awful as you are imagining it would be. Mm-hmm. And often, paradoxically, when you embrace it and allow it, it tends to fade.
Yeah, I think Dave Burns. We talked about that with him in our episode with him not too long ago as well. That was a that's a fun one. And paradoxical intention is of course something we've talked about in an earlier episode as well. Um, Michael, what I enjoy about this is secondary disturbance. Once you identify it as a problem, the process in working on it is the same as a primary disturbance. So fortunately, we're not really necessarily complicating matters, but we're just identifying another way of a problem. And of course, with things like addictions, oftentimes the secondary disturbance is really what makes it worse. What really deepens the problem is the secondary disturbance. A lot of people say when it comes to addictions, how we react to relapse is the one of the most important things. Some people react and go, "Oh, darn it, I messed up because I'm human." And all right, and I felt the urge and a moment of weakness. It got me. Darn. Well, here I go. I'm going to go back to sobriety, do it again. Other people think, well, there I am. I messed up again. What a schlub I am. I might as well just keep on going because I'm an addict. That's what I do. And then, of course, they're sad. They're using again. And so then they rethink, geez, I'm just an awful person. And look at me, just anxious and using and engaging in all these behaviors that I know I shouldn't be doing. And it just kind of spirals from there. And they're using more and more and more. With addiction, with anxiety, with anger, they can just say, this is just who I am. And here I go. So work on that secondary disturbance because that keeps it from getting deeper.
Deeper and keeps it from continuing on and having a life as of its own, because sometimes someone has an addiction and they're determined not to act addictively, and then they do. So that's the primary emotional problem. I must satisfy my urge. It's awful if I don't. So that's the primary emotional problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then observing that last night they drank too much and blacked out, then observing that, they say, I shouldn't have blacked out. I'm an awful person. That's the secondary disturbance. And then the next step is, I'm so depressed, I need a drink. And that could go on and on and on. So again, it's the secondary disturbance that often is the main culprit. So work on that.
Yeah, don't get me started on tertiary disturbance, man.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the
That's
worst.
right. There is such a thing as tertiary disturbance also, but I won't get you started. In fact, I'll finish things off by thanking you all for viewing our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, please comment below what you liked, what you didn't like. Give us a like and support us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/the REBT Advocates, and subscribe to the REBT Advocates to stay on the rational side of life.